Now let's head into the papers now, see what the headlines are across Nigeria. And I have with me via Skype managing editor Ayodele Adio. Ayodele, good morning. It's good to have you join me this morning.
Good morning, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Great. Now let's begin with the Leadership newspaper. Leadership newspaper this morning says easing of the lockdown. Federal government retains current phase, prepares for full reopening of the economy. That has multiple writers there explaining different areas of the eased lockdown. Now, from the Leadership, let's go to News Direct. And this focuses on the IPPIS. No deduction of 50% as payee tax of tertiary institution workers. As the federal government is saying this. Payee is the pay-as-you-earn tax system for salary earners. All right, from there, let's go to the national economy. Proposed benchmark may be revised as oil price hits 2-month high. Okay, that's some cheery news there. Daily Times is next now, and it says on COVID-19, federal government extends first phase eased lockdown by 2 weeks. Certainly, that news came in yesterday and says that despite efforts made so far, Nigeria not yet ripe to fully reopen economy, and identifies densely populated local governments with high number of COVID-19 cases, and also to engage in aggressive scaling up of community participation. Okay, my guest would like to talk about this certainly as we get along. From there, let's go to Daily Trust. And from the COVID-19, Nigeria not ripe for total relaxation of lockdown. That's President Buhari saying this. He extends interstate travel ban by 2 weeks as cases double, and Kano residents lament lockdown extension. Restriction not the best for now. Experts are saying this. All right, from there, let's go to the Blueprint, which is the last paper for this time. As federal government extends eased lockdown by 2 weeks, Buhari insists on strict enforcement and cautions security agents, wants governors to work with the PTF as a presidential task force, and Kano's lockdown remains. Lagos FCT Ogun maintains status quo, and interstate travel ban, curfew continue. Katsina relaxes order. Ekiti begins drone motorized fumigation or decontamination, as the case may be. All right, that's what you see on the Blueprint. All right, Ayodele, if you see the story on the Daily Times as well as Daily Trust, they are all related. It has to do with the extension of the first phase of the eased lockdown by 2 weeks. That news came in yesterday when it was announced by the PTF to the people. Now, the way Daily Trust puts it, as in Nigeria not ripe for total relaxation of lockdown, from your observation, if you take Lagos, for instance, it will be said that Lagos is not free to go about normal, businesses, and all businesses are not open yet. But what's the difference anyway? When you go out there, everyone is outside, all buses, in fact, it seems like all activities are in full swing in Lagos. Ayodele, can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Good.
So yes, first of all, it's been difficult to ensure compliance in Lagos State. You still have buses loading passengers to full capacity rather than observing the physical distancing that was recommended by the state government. You still have markets, that are crowded with people every now and then. You have bus stops that are also crowded with people every single morning and every single evening. So, the idea that you can enforce a total compliance to some of these issues have been, way beyond the hands of the state government in Lagos. It's been almost impossible for them to enforce that. And so if you look at that critically, I would allude to your argument that what difference does it make at the end of the day? Because a whole lot of people are violating it. And whether you extend it for 2 weeks or not, people are still going to violate it. But that of course is not citizens to blame to that extent. You have to, culpability here goes to the government because it's its job to ensure that there is strict compliance with the regulations or the laid down regulations that it had made. And failure to do that, the buck has to stop at the state government's table again. So, because I assume that before they took the decision to relax the lockdown and to put out certain precautionary measures, they would have anticipated some level of resistance from the public, and they should have in their plan built in certain, mitigation for the risk to say that, okay, if people are proving stubborn to obey certain rules and regulations, these are the steps that we are going to take to ensure, that they comply. So on both sides, citizens have not been behaving as responsibly as they would like. And of course, government have not been enforcing their own rules as they also like. So here we are. We should count ourselves lucky that the rate of infection is not already hitting the roof, even though it's steadily on the climb.
All right.
But I think we should count ourselves lucky that people are really not dropping dead on the streets.
All right, Ayodele, what do you make of because when you're saying that the level of compliance, we don't have 100% level of compliance, and on the other hand, the government through its forces or through its own system is not able to enforce that compliance from Nigerians. What do you make from that window? Then what is the power of the government from that window when the government is saying we are doing everything possible to fight COVID-19, to ensure that it doesn't spread and all of that?
Well, I don't deny the fact that they are working hard. I think the effort is there. We have to give them a B+ for effort here. But the reality on ground is that they have been failing woefully to ensure compliance. Take the interstate lockdown, for instance. There's supposed to be an interstate lockdown, but what you find is that people have consistently been traveling across the states regularly. You have governors who have been relocating Alamaji's from one state to another. You've had people who have been hiding in trucks, moving from one state to the other. I think it was last week, you had tons of people right at the Lagos-Ibadan entry point in Lagos, rushing into Lagos, irrespective of the lockdown. So in that regard, they have failed to ensure strict compliance. And I do not believe that government lacks the mechanism to enforce such strict compliance. If they want to, if they are up to it, I'm sure that they can make that happen. But it's quite unfortunate that you find people still traveling across these states. You still have people moving from one state to cause infection in another state. And it's quite disappointing. So I think that the government needs to step up its game, lift it a notch higher to ensure that there is a strict level of compliance here. But it also has to ramp up its communication. I think it's not done enough to communicate to its citizens, to communicate the danger of COVID-19. And except it does that effectively, a lot of people are going to run away with this hoax theory that the COVID-19 does not exist and their lives are not at risk.
Okay, we have to leave it here now. Ayodele Adio, thank you so much, Managing Editor of the Avalon Daily. Thank you very much for talking to us on TVC Breakfast. Star across Nigeria, and I have with me, joining me on Skype for this, the Managing Editor, Avalon Daily, Ayodele Adio. Ayodele, good morning, and thanks for joining us on Skype for the paper review. Let's begin with the leadership.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Let's begin with the leadership newspaper. Easing of lockdown, federal government retains current phase, prepares for full reopening of the economy. And that's what you see. Order stricter enforcement of restrictions for 2 weeks and caution security agencies against abuses. And says 57% of Nigerians support easing of lockdown. We're reviewing claims on COVID-19 cure. Onu is saying this. The Science and Technology Minister. Lagos, Kano, Borno account for 52% of deaths and 60% of all confirmed cases between 21 and 50 years. Mamora, the Minister of State for Health, is saying this. All right, all that on the front page of the leadership newspaper. News Direct is next now. IPPIS, no deduction of 50% as pay as you earn tax of tertiary institution workers. Federal government is saying this. All right, and from there, let's go to the national economy that says proposed benchmark may be revised as oil price hits 2-month high. That's national economy. Daily Times is next, and it's on COVID-19. Federal government extends first phase ease lockdown by 2 weeks and says despite efforts made so far, Nigeria not yet ripe to fully reopen economy. Okay, from there, let's go to Daily Trust. COVID-19, Nigeria not ripe for total relaxation of lockdown. President Buhari saying this extends interstate travel by 2 weeks as cases double. Kano residents lament lockdown extension and restriction not the best for now. Experts certainly commenting on this. From there, let's go to the Blueprint newspaper. As federal government extends eased lockdown by 2 weeks, Buhari insists on strict enforcement and caution security agents, wants governors to work with the presidential task force, and interstate travel ban curfew continues. All right, and Kano relaxes order. Ekiti begins drone motorized fumigation or decontamination, as the case may be. All right, now, Ayodele, if you see, still on this issue of lockdown or not lockdown, the maintaining of the status quo across parts of the country, when it comes to interstate travel, the ban is still there, the curfew is still there, and the eased lockdown somehow in Lagos and Abuja and Ogun State are still on. So status quo is maintained for 2 weeks. But one major thing that some experts are talking about is that state governors, what they do, their strategy is totally different from what the federal government is the direction the federal government is going on COVID-19 strategies. And it has warranted the president to call for a synergy between the governors and the federal government. What do you make of this?
I mean, I've been on this show a couple of times where I complained about the lack of coordination between the federal government and the state government. And once there's a lack of coordination, you're not going to make any meaningful progress. So I'm glad that the presidency has recognized this problem and is determined to fix it to ensure that there's a higher level of coordination between the center and the several states, because the peculiarities across several states are quite different. And so you'd expect different responses from different state governments across the 36 states. So while there is a national policy based on science, which there has to be that grand policy by the federal government based on the advice of the presidential task force, the state governments would also have to look into their own local peculiarities and realities, if you'd like, to tweak its modalities to suit the general policy by the federal government. And that has to be done so that we can make considerable progress, because the situation where there is a lack of coordination between the center and states, you just have a situation where you keep working at cross purposes. For instance, you'd have people deporting Almajiris to your state, just like what happened in Kaduna, where over 30 persons, the Almajiris that were deported to Kaduna eventually tested positive for the coronavirus. So imagine if the Kaduna state government did not take the initiative to test these kids before they got into their state, it would have worsened the problem or the crisis in Kaduna. So you need state governments to align and coordinate better so that you can defeat this thing. You cannot defeat the virus without the collaborative effort. And to think that you can do it on your own as a state or from the center alone, you would just be gazing at the stars.
One other issue, Ayodele, that is still on the front burner is the level of enlightenment on COVID-19. Even after several months, after the lockdown, after the number of deaths, after the number of infections and news from across the world, there are still a lot of people who say that COVID-19 does not exist and that it's a scam. Is this a product of inadequate awareness, or you think it's an illiteracy issue? What do you make of that?
I think it's a couple of things, and I'll run through them very, very quickly. I think it's a couple of things. One is that I think there seems to be some sort of there seems to be some divergence between the people that locals watch on TV, and the scientists and the experts that they listen to, and the news journalists and commentators like you and I that they listen to, and their reality on ground. So let's take Nigeria, for instance. The last NBS report says 83 million Nigerians are desperately and hopelessly poor. Now you're working via Skype, isn't it? Your whole newsroom, and I am working via Skype. The elites are going to work, working from their offices, earning a living. They can use Zoom for their meetings, and somehow they can maintain some level of productivity and earn an income. Whereas the young man in Damaturu or the farmer in Plateau State, or the cattle rearer in Birnin Kebi, or the trader in Umaya, who does not have the luxury of a Zoom, who does not have the luxury of a smartphone or an internet connection, is completely cut out of this reality. And you are here telling him every single day that he should sit at home while you are having work done. So there seems to be a disconnect. You have a group of people who are upset about the fact that they cannot come out and earn a daily income, whereas the people who are talking to them every day on television are doing their work and getting their pay. So to that extent, there needs to be some level, some kind of communication from the federal and state governments to be able to persuade citizens that the reality of an explosion of this infection in Nigeria will be grave. And Mike, I tell you, it is worrisome, because if we go by what the Lagos State Commissioner of Health said, I think it was last week, where he said that by August, there could be potential 120,000 cases in Lagos. If we go by the global standard, it is assumed that 5% of the total number of cases are going to need hospital beds. So 5% of 120,000, I think, is about 6,000. You will need 6,000 beds to be able to cater for people if you have 120,000 infection by August. The entire country does not have up to 6,000 beds. Lagos State alone has less than 700 beds. We have less than 350 intensive care beds in the country. So what are you going to do when 7,000 people need hospitalization in your country? So we need to ramp up the message. We need to convince people and persuade them that the dangers are real. People are dying. 80,000 have been killed in America, over 300,000 worldwide. The dangers are real. For some reason, maybe because of our climate or our location, the virus has not been as deadly as it is over the world in Africa, and we should be thankful for that. But that does not mean that we should ignore that this is a very deadly disease.
Yeah.
So government needs to ramp up its communication at all levels and ensure that there is compliance. People need to wear masks. People need to maintain social distancing. I'm sure that schools are pressing to open. Churches and mosques want to open. There needs to be standard operating measures to ensure that for a mosque to open, for a church to open, for a school to open, these should be the laid down rules. Because, Mike, we cannot afford a spike in infection. It will be a terrible one to behold.
All right. Let me ask you this question that I ask most of my guests since the last few days. Now, the point there is a lot of people have said that the world will never remain the same again after COVID-19. What do you think is going to change the most about the way we live, about the way we do things, especially in our country like Nigeria?
Well, I do not think there will be a radical change in the world. Yes, there are going to be changes, but I do not think that it's going to be that broad and radical. What I envisage would happen, obviously, is that a whole lot of countries who depend on their supply chains from China will try to look inwards to see how they can move their manufacturing and over-reliance on the Chinese manufacturing plants to see how they can be more dependent. Because what happened during this crisis was that they were caught pants down, and since the factories shut down in China, it put a lot of companies and organizations in the West in a whole lot of trouble. So I see countries try to renegotiate that thing. So secondly, I also see businesses try to cut costs to the extent that why do you need to hop on a flight from Nigeria to Douala to hold a meeting when you can catch the person on Zoom? News organizations will also have to change dramatically. Why do I drive 5 a.m. to TVC studio to sit in your office with a cup of coffee when I can catch you over Skype? So there are going to be changes, but I don't think they are going to be dramatic. Organizations will look to cut cost. Organizations will also look at the possibilities of people working from their home instead of crowding office spaces. That could also mean that organizations would have also cut the cost of property. Instead of renting a huge office, you can have a small space and have some of your team work from home. So I think these are the changes that we're going to see. Some jobs will be lost based on these changes that we're going to see. But it's the job of the government and society to also retrain its citizens to build their capacity to respond to the trends or the global changes that will happen inevitably
Okay.
as a consequence of this pandemic.
All right. We have to leave you here now. Thank you very much, Ayodele Adio, for your time on the program. We wish you well.